Welcome to another episode of How to Adult with Travis Walker. Today we brought on the hilarious, the knowledgeable, the handsome Ray Dominguez. He came on the show to talk about something very, very important, which is buying a car. We all have to buy a car at some point. We either have to buy used, we have to buy new, we could buy online, we can buy in the store. There's so many decisions that we have to make when we want to buy a car. And so Ray and I dive into all of the nitty-gritty things about buying a car, interest rates, monthly payments. We even dive into the status of sales in the United States when it comes to cars. So get excited. We're going to talk about all the things. Buckle up, because we are going to learn how to adult together. Ray, we are finally in the closet together. Are you excited?
In the closet together.
Yes, sir.
Never been more excited than to be in the closet with you.
Perfect. That's perfect. Oh my gosh. I've been teeing that up for all day, actually. Well, I'm excited. We're here to talk about buying cars and car sales. And I think that's what a lot of people go through as adults. At some point, we have to figure out how to buy a car and what car is the right way and the right avenue to buy a car. And I think that you're going to provide a lot of good information on how to approach this responsibly and knowledgeably. So I'm excited. But first, I want the audience to get to know you a little bit better. I'd like to know your location and what you do for work to build some credibility.
Yeah, I'm in the Austin area. I live in Pflugerville right now, which is essentially right outside of Austin, but I work in Austin. I work for a car dealership called Sterling Acura. Been doing car sales for about 20 years. So this is the fourth dealership that I've worked for, so not many. I don't like to jump around too much, but
right.
Yeah, that's where I'm at right now, Sterling Acura.
Nice. So have you always been in a luxury brand, or have you jumped around in from kind of standard brands or into luxury as well?
Yeah, I actually started out with a Mitsubishi store. It was
okay.
It's a funny story actually, because I wasn't planning on getting in the car business. That was not my intention in life ever. But
do people plan to get in the car business?
Now that you say it, maybe not. It's interesting. There's a lot of people that do try to get into the car business, which I'll cover that with you in a bit, I'm sure. But I went over to a Mitsubishi store. I was just looking for kind of like a part-time job to do. I was my last semester. I was in college at the time. I'm like, I need something to do for the time being.
Right.
So looking for just something kind of part-time. Talked to a guy there, and he said, you ever thought about selling cars? And I said, no, I'm not planning on doing that. No, thank you. And one thing led to another, and somehow I got hired into as a finance manager. So I kind of have a different approach to the car business than most people have. A lot of people have started by selling cars. I kind of got hired into doing the finance part of it, which I had no clue what I was doing. But
sure,
I started with a Mitsubishi store. And then right after that, I did move up to a Volvo store. Volvo with Subaru, had both of those brands there. Then I went over to Volkswagen, and then ultimately ended up with a luxury brand with Acura, which now that I'm in a luxury brand, it's kind of hard to go back to anything else.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine. So, well, that's an incredible kind of cliff notes of your story. Full disclosure, I've bought a car from Ray, and my most recent car actually, and it was an incredible experience because Ray was involved, obviously. That's incredible. So you've worked kind of all around the block in terms of standard brands and luxury brands, and you kind of lean more towards luxury brands in terms of working for them. But maybe they're not the right car for everyone. What do you think in terms of luxury versus standard brands specifically?
Yeah, it's definitely not the car for everybody. Mainly, I think your budget kind of dictates what each kind of car does for you. Definitely, you don't want to be looking at $40,000-$50,000 cars if you're on a particular, monthly income, which most luxury brands start somewhere close to 40 grand. And that's about accurate. I think we start in the 30s, go to the upper 30s real quick, and then from there on, it kind of moves up. So to each their own. I think the way people build cars now, there's not really a particular brand that I would sit there and, the owner of my dealership may say, why are you saying that? But at this point, I don't think there's a particular brand that just is, so much better than the other brands. They make cars so well now. Everything comes
Right.
with warranties, everything is protected. So it's kind of just what you like the most, what kind of vehicle you like, how long do you plan on keeping it? There's so many aspects that go into it, but yeah, luxury's not for everybody for sure.
Sure, sure. Before we get too far into kind of the process and how to approach cars, I thought that I would ask this while I have you here, but people have a very specific view of car salesmen in the United States, and it's kind of in a negative light. I know you have feelings toward the public opinion towards car salesmen, so I wanted you to kind of say what that opinion was and maybe expand upon it and why it's correct and why it's wrong. I've seen you talk about this several times, so I'd like you to kind of address the car salesman stigma.
Oh, you did your homework.
Oh yeah,
You did your homework. That's a huge thing for me. The entire car salesman stigma, the entire perception of what car people do, that's been such a huge thing for me. So much so that I almost didn't get into the car business for that particular reason.
right.
I when the his name was Tom, the guy that hired me in, but he said, "No, do you want to sell cars?" And the first thing I thought of was, "No way in hell," because it was mainly perception. It had nothing to do with what the job was. Sales is sales, and I think if you have a great personality, you should try sales out if it's something that suits you. But at that time, I just thought, there's no way. Everyone's got such a bad perception of what these guys do, and I did for sure, and I still do for a lot of places. Um,
Sure.
I've spent, this is my 20th year now doing car sales, almost right about I think 19 years, and I've spent all 19 years, trying to make sure that I change what people think of that.
Right.
Um, when I first started doing it, I remember I almost didn't want to tell anyone that I was in car sales. I mean, I almost, like, people would ask what you do, and almost didn't want to say it just because I knew what that perception was. But it's been years now of changing that. There are definitely some bad apples. I think it's getting weeded out as time goes
Yeah.
by. There's a lot of old school thinking, a lot of old school approaches to how to do business. If you look back in probably the 80s and 90s, which is before I was working in the car business, but the 80s and 90s, there's some scandalous stuff out there. I mean, there's old movies and stuff that have, scandalous car stuff going on. And I think it just
Yeah.
kind of painted a bad picture for everybody involved. And now we're trying to correct it. And we try to correct it by just training people properly. I tell all of my salespeople, no lying, no cheating, and no stealing, period. That's it.
Right.
I don't have a whole lot of, I like to push the envelope a little bit with some things that I say or do. And I definitely like to joke around. But when it comes to doing business, there's just three things that you can't do if you work for me. And that's lie, cheat, steal. And that's really the only thing. I think those are probably the main things that car salespeople are known for that are negative.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So you see a lot of the stigma comes historically, you would say, from the 80s and 90s. What was going on? What standard practice that made this stereotype of car salesman? What was going on back then?
I think a lot of it was just full disclosure. I don't think
Mm,
that most dealers, and uh, I shouldn't even say I don't think. I know that probably most dealers out there weren't disclosing everything fully. It was a different time for sure. There was no internet. There was not as much research that people could do before they walked into a dealership. So,
hmm.
so car dealerships, along with plenty of other sales, jobs, but car dealerships in particular, took advantage of that. With customers not knowing how much a car should be worth, or not knowing what their credit really meant, and what type of rates they should get, or what kind of discounts they might qualify for. There's just so many different little things to it that they didn't pay attention to. And I think most dealers back then, I think they paid a lot of attention to just how much money they were making. And
Right.
sometimes you don't do the right thing just to try to make a few extra dollars. And unfortunately, it kind of stuck with us for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and you said that the industry is responding to fight these stereotypes. You
Mhm.
mentioned training. I'm curious, is there anything else that the industry has kind of responded to and try to fight these stereotypes of
Yeah.
the car salesman?
Yeah, we do a lot of disclosures now.
Yeah,
Most dealerships you go to when you're signing paperwork, there are so many different forms that you fill out now that disclose things that normally weren't disclosed before. I think
right.
when you agree to buying a vehicle and you agree to what your monthly payment's going to be, our finance managers go through every line of that contract to make sure that you know how much you paid for the car, how much you got for the trade, how much your interest rate is. That's probably one of the biggest changes that we've done. Some of it has just been, the legally with state laws and stuff. I mean, we have to have certain stickers on our vehicles. You have to have certain prices that are available to everybody. There's just a lot of things that have changed legally as well too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's really helpful. I think in as people start to think about, oh, I want to go buy a car from a dealership, kind of knowing that there are bad apples, but the industry is responding and trying to fight that. I think that that's really comforting
Mm-hmm.
as people are worried as they start their car buying journey. So that's really good. I love that.
Yeah.
So, thinking about what I just said in terms of people starting their car buying journey, when someone decides, I think I'm ready to buy a car, I think I'm ready to kind of start this process.
Mm-hmm.
What is their first step? Should their first step be when they have that mental note of, I'm ready to start this process? What do you think?
So anybody trying to buy their first car, the first thing they need to do is find out what their budget's going to be. And I
Right.
think that a lot of people, especially young individuals who are buying their first car, they don't think that through very well. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people look at, just what their pocketbook says and says, you know what, I can afford blah a month. And they don't really sit down and do the math. There's
Mm-hmm.
been too many times where I have, somebody young sitting down with a salesperson. My salesperson comes to me and says, hey, this guy wants to buy this car. And we look at the credit application and I'm looking at the income and I'm thinking, this is not a good financial decision for this person.
Right.
Not my position to go tell someone that it's a good or bad financial position for you. Because who knows what their personal story is. Maybe they got a lot of money in the bank. I don't know, but it happens way too often for me to know that a lot of people don't pay attention to what they can truly afford. And you'll see people with low incomes coming out with a $700 car payment that just doesn't make a whole lot of
Yikes.
sense. So if I was giving advice to someone who was brand new at buying a car, it was your first time, I would say sit down, look your budget over, do something that is reasonable. I think a lot of banks like to see a 20% of your income for anyone who's a first time buyer. They'll approve people dang near up to like 50% of your income, which tells you a little something about what people can qualify for. Just because you qualify for it doesn't mean you should be buying it. And that
Right.
goes with a house and that goes with any other kind of loan you want to get. But
Right.
it's easy to do it with a car purchase. You fall in love with this beautiful machine. You're driving this beat up, car that the AC doesn't work. And then you walk into a dealership and it's a brand new car and it's beautiful. And, you think I can do 600 a month, nothing, and that might not be the right car for you. That
Right.
would be my first set of advice. Second would be do some research on the cars,
Yeah.
before you spend all your days just dealership to dealership test driving cars and you don't even know anything about the cars or anything. Just do some research on what good prices are, do some research on what they're going for in the market, have an idea what you're getting into before you do it. And the third thing for me would be look up reviews on dealerships.
Right.
Look at that place. I'm not going to boast too much about our store, but we dang near have 5 stars on any site you look us up on. Uh,
Right.
I can't say the same for every store out there, but there are some other stores that do have really good reviews, and reviews is somewhere you should focus on before you walk into a store. See what they're about, see what kind of business they do, see how they treat their customers. Um, yeah, I think those would be probably my main three.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great tips there. I want to jump back to the money portion of this,
Cool.
month to month. So Is the monthly payment the main thing that people should be looking at, or is there additional things like interest rates or other things that they should also be thinking about? Seeing that monthly payment number, that's not your total expense on that vehicle month to month. What are some other things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, 100%. When I talk about your monthly expense and paying attention to it, all I mean by that is just making sure you don't spend too much a month. Now, when it comes down to finding out what your budget is, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And
Right.
part of that is, yes, you do want to find out what kind of interest rate suits you the best, suits your credit the best.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't understand credit. I mean, it's nothing that's really even taught in schools if you think about it. You go all through high school, you don't really sit there and have a class talking about your FICO score and interest rates and how interest rates add up and how car loans work. You don't know much of that. So you kind of just get into it blindly, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, but you should be looking up what your scores are. Now, when you're young and you're just new to the world, you may not have a whole lot of credit established. If you have zero credit is better than bad credit. Okay. So
Yeah.
make sure that people understand that first. If you've tried to take some loans out before, little credit cards and stuff, and you haven't been paying them off, it's not a good thing. It's not going to help you get a car. That is for sure going to help you get, an 18% type interest rate on a car, which is
Oh my gosh.
possible. Yeah. So if you're a first time buyer, you want to make sure you check your credit, see what kind of credit you have. And if you have no credit, you can get a loan, but you have to be prepared to possibly pay some high interest rates. Or you want to find someone that can maybe co-sign for you, a family member. Watch out with co-signing. You don't want to just ask anybody, but
Right.
preferably your closest relatives. A lot of people just reach out to friends sometimes, and it kind of makes it a hairy situation. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, find a relative that will help you. Or if you have some credit cards or a couple lines of credit, if you don't have them, I would recommend you go and try to get one. It's not that hard to open up a little Capital One credit card. They'll give you a $500 limit. Doesn't mean you need to go out there and spend it all. But
Don't spend it all.
yeah, don't go spend it all and or spend it and not have the money to pay it back. But open up
Right.
something in a couple months, you'll get a credit score. You'll sit around with the 600 or so FICO, and you'll qualify for a car. You'll be fine. But yeah, do some research. A lot of people like to look at their own banks, and they'll see what their banks are offering to kind of get an idea for what kind of interest rate they'll offer. A bank doesn't have for the most part, a bank doesn't have any other motive. They're giving you a loan for your credit score, and they'll tell you what kind of rate you have.
Right.
Go to a dealership. Of course, there are some other motives. We do make money based on the bank and based on what kind of rate you get. There is money that we make on our end, so you should do that research before you go in to kind of get an idea.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that I was super cautious about when I bought my first vehicle myself, and then also my second vehicle, was if I could afford that vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of, can I afford the insurance on this vehicle? Can I afford the gas that this vehicle takes
Mm-hmm.
month to month? I was super cautious about that with my truck, not so much with my second vehicle, but I can obviously afford the monthly payment, but can I afford the insurance? Can I afford the gas, especially right now?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so do you see a lot of people thinking like this, or most of the people that you see, just emotional and wanting to get in a new vehicle?
Luckily we're in the Austin area. So as far as the area goes, we do have a lot of people that are a little more keen to these type of things. And the younger generations are really getting a lot smarter with it. So
That's good.
when they do come in, they are asking the right questions, and I can see them sitting there most of the time thinking about, well, my insurance is going to cost me this, and gas is going to cost me this, especially now because gas is on everybody's mind. But insurance and gas pop up a lot. So I think people are paying attention to it. I think that they could do a little bit better than what they have been doing.
Right.
Some of that, though, when you're with a good salesperson, unfortunately, you're going to fall in love with the car and you're going to spend more money. That happens. Yeah, I won't. It's not unfortunate, I guess. It's unfortunate if you just spend way too much, because at the end of the day, no matter how honest and open that salesperson is with you. They're not your financial coach.
Right.
They're not someone who's going to sit there and say, well, hey, you should rethink this payment. It's too much for you. That's kind of something you have to do on your end. And
Right.
and yeah, put all those into consideration, your gas, your insurance, and just try to make a good, healthy decision for yourself.
Yeah.
And know that if you make a decision later on, it was your decision. Doesn't
Just
necessarily mean that you were had. It just means that, hey, maybe next time buy something a little cheaper.
right. Right. Oh my God. That's funny. So we're talking about gas. I don't want to move on because it's kind of a hot topic in the last
Mhm.
month, last year or so. Gas has gone up dramatically. I'm wondering how the increase in prices, has
Mhm.
affected the industry. Are you seeing a downturn in car sales or an upturn in car sales because of the price of gas? How has gas impacted this?
Yeah. No, gas hasn't done much to it, surprisingly.
Wow.
But I do think it's probably affecting the truck market a bit. I'm not in the truck market.
Yeah.
It's affecting it a tad, but right now, before gas even became an issue, we've been dealing with a chip shortage. We were dealing with COVID. Every car dealership out there right now is lacking for inventory. So right now, every car that we get, we're selling it before it touches the ground most of the time because we don't have
Right.
enough in stock. So the market is actually pretty crazy. Everyone's buying cars. Well, I say everyone's buying cars. They're buying all the inventory that we have, which is
Right.
not the normal inventory that we used to have. But we're not hurting because of gas for now. I mean, I think if it keeps on going any further up, that might be a different story. I mean, I have
Yeah.
a Jeep Gladiator that I'm kicking myself right now. I thought it was a great idea. I got a lift and tires, and I thought this is gonna be sick. No, what a dumb decision. See, even I'm sitting here saying don't do dumb things. That was a dumb thing. I should have thought this through.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's just what it comes down to. That's totally fair. You mentioned the chip shortage. I'd like you to kind of explain the chip shortage and how that affected car sales, and especially of all my research, it really affected the used car market in terms of if you had a smarter vehicle. That vehicle was now worth more because of the chip shortage. Maybe I'm wrong, and
Yeah.
I'd like you to correct me. What was the chip shortage, and why did it affect car sales so much?
Yeah. So the chip shortage affected dang near everything, every piece of machinery out there. I mean, more than cars. We had
Right,
electronics and stuff. Best Buy was hurting. I think the PlayStation, even there was so many different things that were shorted because of certain parts that were needed during this time, and it's all kind of happened after COVID shutdowns, right?
right,
So that happened, ship shortage happened, and then when that happened, we had just huge lots full of all these vehicles. I think Ford has a pretty popular photo out there right now where it has a ton of trucks that are just sitting on this open area that can't be driven because they're missing the
wow,
chips, right? They're missing the chips that are needed. So when that happened, what it did to the used car market is it made almost everyone's cars worth so much because car dealerships were just hurting for inventory. We're still hurting for inventory. If you drive down the street right now and go to any car dealership, just take a look at their lot, drive to the back, you'll see that most of them don't have enough cars in stock.
yeah,
So what it did to used cars is it did inflate it a lot. Right now, you're anything you're driving right now is worth so much more than it was a couple years ago. Right now, there's plenty of cars that I'm buying from people who I'm buying it for nearly what they bought it for new 2 years ago.
yeah,
So that's what it did mostly to the used car market. It just made everything much more expensive because your car is worth so much more. So
right,
the market's definitely a little. It's not recovered fully from it. I think it's going to be a bit, and even now we got our numbers from Acura kind of just showing us what our projections were going to be for the rest of the year. And from what I can tell, it doesn't look like inventory is going to get, super crazy anytime soon. It looks like we're going to be a little short for a while.
wow, wow. That's really interesting. Okay, all right. So with there's options where, yeah, you can buy a car but there's also options on renting a vehicle. And so I'm interested in kind of your argument for either side, buying a vehicle versus renting a vehicle. How do people approach that? Because I know, our friend John rented for a long time and
Yeah.
may buy in the future. So people make decisions. That's kind of the point of this show, I think, so far. People make
Yeah.
decisions, and some people decide to rent.
Yeah. So it's called leasing technically.
Okay.
But I guess if you break it down, it pretty much is like renting something. Um, Leasing has come so far in the past probably 10 or 15 years. And I've always kind of blamed this on, what we talked about earlier, which was old school car sales. Back in, even when I first started about 20 years ago, I kind of started during a time where leasing was still kind of frowned upon. And I think if you talk to anybody, if you talk to your parents or you talk to your grandparents in particular, how old are you? How old are you, Travis?
I am 25.
25, yeah. So how old are your parents?
My parents are in their 50s.
In their 50s, yeah. So talk to your parents about leasing, and most likely a lot of people in their age group and older will tell you that leasing's a terrible idea. And
Yeah.
what was happening back then was that there was a lot of car dealers that just weren't fully disclosing what happens in a lease. There's some people that showed up to car dealerships that wanted a small payment, and they came in looking at an expensive car and said, I want to pay $300 a month. And the salesperson said, great, you can have this car right here for $300. And it's a $30,000 car, which makes no mathematical sense. But they signed up for it. And I think that a lot of people just weren't explained properly what a lease was.
Yeah.
And there was mileage fees and damage fees and so many things that are involved in a lease. But fast forward to today, leasing is dang near 80% of new car business for us and for some other manufacturers out there. Because I think if you look around, most people trade their cars in about every 3 years anyway. We would have so many customers come in and they're ready to trade their car. It's 3 years later, or it's 2 years later even. And they're asking to trade a vehicle in. And we would start telling them like, hey, have you thought about leasing a car? And people would say, no, I don't want to lease. And then you sit there and say, well, you're trading your car in 2 years. And the car before this one, you traded in what, 2 years or 3 years? And they say, yes. So what are you doing right now? You're throwing away so much money. If you're going to trade it in, you know yourself. If you're going to trade your car in every 3 years or even 4 or less, you should be considering leasing. Now, if you're someone that says, hey, I keep my cars for 10 plus years, okay, well, don't. And even at that point, you can still entertain a lease, because sometimes a lease deal is decent enough to where at the end of a lease, you can buy it out, and it makes more sense then to do it that way than just finance the car from the beginning. So there's multiple ways to look at it. But if you're going to do a lease, make sure you're someone who really doesn't keep your car that long, probably. Check your mileage, double check how much you're driving, a year.
Yeah.
And come into it with a little bit of money down, at least take care of taxes and stuff like that. It does help out the payment. A lot of manufacturers like to advertise special payments and kind of like say really, really fast at the very end of the commercial how much money it takes to put down to get there. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen it. You'll see like, oh, Lexus, December to remember, come and lease this brand new 2022 Lexus for $399 a month. And you're like, that's a 40-something thousand car. Well, the fine print says, it's about $5,000 down plus your taxes. So it ends up being $8,000 down. There's a lot of little fine print you got to pay attention to on a lease.
Oh yeah. It's kind of like medication commercials can cause death at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned, people going in every 3 years, or a lot of people going every 3 years to get a new car. I'm interested. I know I did this for very specific reasons, but when people have a semi-new car, maybe they still have a payment on it, and they decide that they want a new car.
Mm-hmm.
What makes that an intelligent decision? Maybe it's not an intelligent decision. Maybe it's an emotional decision, and maybe that's the question of, how do people deal with their emotions when they want a new car?
Mm,
There's so much emotion in there,
yeah.
but people always want a new car. They always want to be driving the next best thing.
Mm,
So how do people approach when they have a decent vehicle, but they're wanting a new one? How should we think about that?
yeah. So I think there was a study, and this was maybe, it might have changed. I think I read this maybe 5 years ago. So I'll be curious to see if it changed any. But there was a study before that said that most people make car payments almost their whole lives. Right.
Wow.
That shows you how often people want a new car. And some of it isn't because they really want it. Some people need a new car because maybe the cars are breaking down. Maybe it's getting older now. Maybe they're expanding their family and they need a bigger unit.
Right.
Maybe gas is crazy like it is now, so they need to get something that's more fuel efficient. Maybe the car payment they have now is too much and they need something less. Or
Yeah.
maybe just the technology period in the car isn't right with the times. If you don't go back that far to see if there's a lot of cars that still don't have Bluetooth in them. Bluetooth
Right.
is relatively new. It's not a very old thing. And I still have some people trading in vehicles that don't have Bluetooth. It's not very often now, but it does happen. So there's a multitude of reasons why people want to trade them in. And most of the time, people have good reasons to. Sometimes, and I won't say it's a bad reason, but I will say that I probably had to second guess myself if I was a particular customer. Sometimes they just pass by a dealership and want to see one. They're like, hey, I want it. And they're not all the time making the best financial decision, because I do it too, man. I go to places and I see something. I'm an impulse buyer. I am
Yeah.
100% impulse buyer. Allison knows this about me. I'll buy anything at any time. But you give me too long to think about it, I'll probably turn it down.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I wouldn't say too many people do it, stupidly. I think most people have a really good reason to want to trade out. It's very rare
Right.
anybody doesn't.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So going back to kind of I guess the nitty gritty, I'm interested. How does credit affect the interest rate that a buyer would get when they go to buy a car? How does their credit affect that?
Yeah. So most of it is based on, and I say most of it, probably a good 80% of it. And I am not an expert in credit, I will say that, but I have done this for 20 years. So I can just tell you from what I've seen, probably close to 80% of it has to do with what your actual score is, right? So if you look at your FICO score, depending on which one you're looking at, there's TransUnion, there's Equifax, and there's Experian. There's all three. And not every dealership uses the same ones.
Yeah.
Not every bank uses the same ones. So it's important to look at all three bureaus. And most of them go as low as a 350 score, which you got to try really hard to get to a 350. Okay. But there's some that get that low, and some get up to 900 and
Right.
900. And I'll tell you this, I've done this now for, again, 20 years, and only one time in my life have I seen a perfect 900 score. So it kind
Wow.
of tells you how often that happens, and it's very, very difficult to get it. So depending on your score, that would be the first thing. If you're looking for one of the best rates out there, you typically want to be somewhere in that 730 kind of range,
Yeah.
730 and up. Most of the time, a computer system will probably just approve you, right? As long as you have a full-time job and you have income and stuff.
Yeah.
If you're anywhere around that score, the computer system typically will just pick you up anyway. Um, you want to be, to even qualify for a loan, for the most part, without any hiccups, you for sure want to be at least a 600, I would say.
Right.
600, probably not going to ask for too much from you. Probably won't need a whole lot, but you will be paying a little bit higher interest rate.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say, that a 620 or a 640, Beacon, it's hard to say what exact rate they'll get, because I've seen some people with a 640 get a 6% rate, and I've seen some people with a 640 get a 12% rate. It
Oh man.
varies so much because, like I said, that the beginning part is, yeah, what's your credit score? And the second part is, how much debt do you have? What is
Mm.
your debt to income ratio? Are you making $3,000 a month, but you have $2,500 going out? There's so many things that affect it. beyond just what that score is going to be.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd also like to touch on why people get a higher interest rate. It's not because the dealership is mean. There's a very specific reason why people get a higher rate. What is that reason?
Yeah, multiple too. One is not paying your bills.
Yeah,
Okay, for sure. And I think we all know our own credit. Even if you haven't seen your credit, you have an idea what you're dealing with because you know how you pay your bills, right?
right.
So yes, if you're not paying your bills, you're going to be getting a higher interest rate. If you now things that are outside of your immediate control that could factor in a higher interest rate would be buying an older car. The older car that you get, the rates do go up.
Yeah.
You are throwing in a bunch of inequity. And what I mean by inequity is maybe you have a 2019, Chevy Silverado and you owe $20,000 on it, but it's only worth 15. Okay. Um, not true. A 2019 Silverado is worth way more than 15. Sorry. But what I mean is if you owe 20 grand and your car's only worth 15, well, then you have $5,000 of negative equity. Well, that has to go somewhere. So it goes onto your new car loan. And when that happens, the bank looks at it and says, well, we are offering you way over the value of what the value of that vehicle is. So if you're at my store, for example, and let's say that you're buying a brand new TLX, okay, and the sticker price on it is $40,000.
Yeah.
Trading in a vehicle and you have an equity, well, then you're throwing that $5,000 on top of this 40. Well, now you're asking for a loan of $45,000 on a car that's really only worth 40. And now you're throwing in your tax, title, and license because you elected to not put any money down. So now you're at $48,000. So now a car that you came in that only cost 40,000, you're up to 48. So you're asking for nearly 120%, right? Almost 125% of the value of that vehicle. So when that value goes up and you're asking for a bigger loan, then your interest rate goes up. So there are a couple things outside of credit score that will hurt your rate. The last one would probably be your term. If you're financing for 48 months or 60 months or 72 or 84 or 96, I would highly recommend you're not doing 96 months. But they're out there.
Right. Right. I think of what my research has said, it really comes down to how risky is it to give you money as an individual.
Yeah.
Is it very risky to give you this loan or is it not very risky? So if your score is higher,
Mm-hmm.
it's not very risky that you're not going to pay the money back at some point in time.
Yeah.
Whereas if your score is lower, then it's a little bit more risky. They'll give you the loan, but they're a little worried about it.
No.
Is that kind of the right way to think about it, or am
Yeah,
I
for sure.
off?
For sure. And also, when you're talking about the risky part, we talk to these banks when we're trying to get these loans done, and you'd be surprised how many times we're having a talk with the lender, and the lender's saying, "Hey, I know they have a good score, but they're on the verge of bankruptcy."
Oh gosh.
And you can tell by looking at a credit score if someone could be on the verge of doing that. If you look at, well, here's their income, and they started to max out all of their credit cards recently. Why did that happen? You got a couple medical bills that just popped up. So the lenders look at that and they say, well, look, you got these medicals that popped up. They just maxed out 3 of their credit cards here in the last month. They just took out another loan, last month for X amount of money or whatever it is. They'll look at that. And even if the score is decent, you could get turned down just because your credit history recently is showing that you're taking out too much credit or you're maxing your credit cards or whatever you're doing. So there's definitely questions that happen internally when we're trying to get loans done that could affect your chances at approval as well.
Yeah, I remember when I bought my truck, the person I was working with, we were talking about my credit score, and I had mentioned, I keep up with my credit score with Credit Karma, and he at one point told me that that's a good thing to keep track of, but it's also they tell you what you want to hear a lot of the time. Have you had that same experience, or are they usually really off between
Yeah,
the actual credit score and what Credit Karma tells us? What have you
yeah.
seen?
I wouldn't say it's they're telling you something that you want to hear type of thing. There are different versions of each bureau. And
Yeah.
depending on what company you're using to monitor your credit, they're using a particular version of that. So there might be Equifax 3.0 or 4.0 or 5.0 or
Yeah.
Equifax 5.0 auto enhanced. There's all types and I might be calling it the wrong one, but there's all types of credit bureaus and there's all types of versions of those bureaus. So when you're buying a car, there's certain versions of that bureau that the banks use. When you're buying a house, there's a completely different credit score that they look at, right?
Oh,
Um,
wow.
it's the same thing that happens with when you're using Credit Karma or you're using one of those monitoring services. Those guys typically use a certain version. Some of them use multiple versions and they kind of blend them together to give you a score. So there's different ones. I wouldn't say that anyone's trying to make you see what they want you to see. That's probably a salesperson just spewing out some garbage. But there's definitely different types of scores, and there have been times where people come in with Credit Karma and they say, "Well, my Credit Karma says, I'm a 710," and I'm having to show that they're a 680. Just there's a little bit of a difference there. Or
Right.
there's times when their Credit Karma is lower, and I've been surprised and I've seen a higher score. So it happens both ways.
Wow. All right. That's interesting. I've learned something today. I like that. So in the spirit of progress, right? We look at our country; it's constantly progressing. Sometimes it's regressing in several different ways, also. But I think car sales is definitely one area and one industry that it is progressing,
Mhm.
because you see different services coming out like Carvana or Vroom that are breaking into car sales, and I'm kind of interested in your opinion on these different types of services and how they are maybe different from the traditional car buying experience.
It's an interesting time to be in car sales, especially with those type of businesses that are coming out. Carvana, um, what Vroom, I think, is the other one, and
Yeah.
people who are doing online sales. I think what we're focused on right now, and sometimes I think that we push this a little too fast. I think that we're in this weird time where everyone thinks that nobody wants to go to a dealership right now, that they just want to buy a car online. Well, I can tell you that that's just not true. We have
Right.
too many customers that have to come in and see a car. They have to come in and drive it. I think the issue that we're running into is that people don't want to deal with a quote unquote sleazy salesperson. That's
Mm.
really all this online buying thing comes down to. And if you're looking at Carvana and those kind of guys, they were doing really well. They're not doing as well right now if you look at the numbers. But they started out great. It was a great idea, but a lot of customers said, "Hey, I got to see it. I got to drive
Yeah.
it. I need to see what damage is on the car." Carvana had this system in place where they would put a car online. The price was so cheap, but it had all this stuff that needed to be done to it. Right?
Oh no.
The photos online look great, but if you read the actual information on the car when you get closer to buying it, it shows you what's damaged, what needs to be fixed. There's so many things on it. Um, it's different. I don't think that we're quite there yet to go fully just buy a car online without seeing it. I just don't think that we're there yet. Maybe eventually we'll get there, but
Yeah.
I do think we have a while to go. I got a hard time believing that people want to buy 30, 40, $50,000 cars, especially used cars that you need to see what's wrong with them,
Right.
without actually seeing it first and being able to drive it. So I'm impartial. I'm not fully closed on it yet, but I do see a need there. I do see a need for regular car dealerships to kind of get with the times and start doing things more digitally, which I think most of us are. But start doing things more digitally, try to make it a little more customer friendly. And
Right.
again, at the very end of the day, making sure that the experience is a right one, where customers come in and don't feel like, oh, I got to deal with the salesperson. And I think that's what kind of pushed the online revolution, so to speak,
Yeah.
of selling cars. Is just that customer salesperson interaction that a lot of dealerships just they lack a good experience. We
Oh yeah.
don't, by the way. We're great.
Right. Exactly. I can attest to that. I completely agree with you. I at the very specifically, I've got to feel how the brakes work. Like if the
Yeah.
brakes are too touchy, I'm like not about it.
Yeah.
I'm very superstitious on that one. So there's another thing I wanted to talk about, which is the Carfax, which I think is really
Mhm.
important when people are considering to buy a used vehicle.
Yeah.
So what are the Carfax? Why should I care about the Carfax? Why should I check the Carfax?
Yeah.
What does that process look like?
Yeah. So Carfax is an interesting thing, because it's not always correct, is one of the biggest problems right now with Carfax. But Carfax has the biggest name. It's been doing it for the longest time. I'm
Yeah.
not a huge, we use Carfax. I'm not a huge fan of Carfax, if I'm being 100% fair about it. And for me, it's a personal issue. When I first started seeing Carfax do their commercials, it would always be a commercial of a sleazy car guy,
Ah,
the customer saying, "Show me the Carfax," and the car salesperson was just like, I don't really want,"
right.
like just being shady. So we did that kind of marketing. I sat there thinking, okay, you guys are just completely pooping on the car salespeople. But then
Yeah.
we all need you, right? Because now if you don't have a Carfax, it's like, oh, you're doing something shady. Well, the ironic part of that is that Carfax is not always right. Um, there's a lot of Carfax is behind. There's a lot of times that Carfax hasn't put the information on it yet. There's been accidents to a car and it's not showing yet. And I think that has something to do with how they communicate with maybe insurance companies or body shops or whatever's getting done.
Yeah.
There's plenty of times where, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. We've sold a car before and a customer would come back a year later and say, "Hey, there's this Carfax issue that you guys didn't show us." And we'll pull the Carfax up from the original day that they bought the car and it was clean.
Yeah.
A year later, something would pop up that was 2 years old or 3 years old or 4 years old. And it would show an accident that didn't get fixed before, or that got fixed from an insurance company. So they're not always accurate. So I would say, hey, you definitely want to see a Carfax. And yes, if any car dealership is refusing to show you a Carfax, or an auto check, I believe is another brand. There's other brands of it too that are all reputable. If they're
Right.
not willing to show you one of those two at least, um, yeah, they're probably doing something a little shady. But check it. It doesn't necessarily mean that nothing was done to it. You should always be looking at a car's paint. You should walk around a vehicle if you have decent vision. Walk around a car in the sunlight, not at nighttime. When it's been raining and you're going to buy this car. If you're worried about whether there was some kind of damage on it, get it under some light. Walk
Yeah.
around the vehicle and look and see. You can tell most of the time when something's been repainted. There's different textures, there's different shades to the color a tad. Just take a good look. Um, but for the I guess for the most part, they are accurate. But I will say they're not 100% accurate for sure.
There you go. I'm learning things. That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Very good. So, as we're running out of time, what's that final piece of advice for people that are considering to buy a car or maybe want to buy a car in the future? What should people be thinking about when they start thinking about buying a car?
Yeah. Well, my name first, and then
Obviously.
no. Um, for first timers in particular, is that the question?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So for first timers in particular, I think just a good summary of kind of what we talked about, which is making sure that your credit's on point. And on point by meaning just it doesn't have to be perfect, but just have some kind of credit that will definitely help you get a loan. B, have a little bit of money down. It's never a good idea to buy an entire vehicle, roll in all the taxes, title, license fees, inspection fees, everything on top, and then take a loan out for that full amount. You should put down something
Yeah.
in the event that you want to trade it early. You're not sitting too far in the hole. Something we did not talk about, if you're not putting down a whole lot of money, please make sure you're buying gap insurance for your vehicle. If you don't know
Ooh.
what gap insurance is, that is if you were to wreck the vehicle, or if it was stolen, or if it was considered a total loss and your insurance company doesn't pay off, which a lot of insurance companies will not pay off the entire car. Gap insurance will take care of the rest. So make sure you do that. It's normally not too much. It's normally $10 a month or so. Just get that on there.
Yeah.
And lastly, just do a little bit of research. Know what you're getting into. Don't it's funny sometimes, but you'll see customers come in, especially new people, and they waste so much of their own time, and you're wasting a little bit of a salesperson's time too. That's
Right.
putting a lot of work in for you, and you're out there test driving 40, $50,000 cars, and then you come inside and you say, yeah, my budget's $300 a month. And
Oh no.
it happens. It probably happens much more than I would like to admit that it happens, but it happens. So we do train our salespeople to ask the appropriate questions to kind of help you along the way. But sometimes salespeople get just as excited as you get, and they want to sell you a car as much as you want to buy a car. And steps get skipped, and you end up finding yourself looking at a car that you just can't afford. So do a little bit of research, do some online calculators, and plug in some amounts, and put an interest rate in there that you think you might be qualified for, and get an idea of how much you can spend to get the payment you want, and then just go from there. I'm not saying to focus just on your payment, because there's so much more involved in it, right? But at least it gives you a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big thing that I learned from this episode and something I didn't really think about or notice is how emotional this process is.
Mm-hmm.
As much as you want to go in and it to be a deal and
Mm-hmm.
not be emotional, it really is emotional for everyone involved, which is
Yeah.
so interesting. It's so interesting to me. Have you seen that in all of your sales that you've done in your 20 years?
Oh, for sure. I've seen people cry, letting go of their car, of trading in their car. I've seen so many people
Wow.
cry, they trade their car, and they're emotionally attached to this thing. I mean, you spend so much time, depending on your job and depending on what your, life is about, but you do spend a lot of time in your car. A lot of people know what car you drive, friends and family know what car you drive. There's just so much tied to you and your car, and your car really is probably most likely the second most expensive thing that you ever buy, right?
Right.
Outside of a house. So when it comes time to spend that money and commit yourself to X amount of dollars, and give up some of your hard-earned money as a down payment and all that good stuff, it's an emotional thing. And what makes it more emotional sometimes is just dealing with the right salesperson, right? That can definitely help you. And that's why I say, and I said earlier, to look at reviews of places and find out where you're going, and before you go in there, and maybe, or if you know somebody, like you did, you reach out to me, go with somebody you trust. That does help a lot with the emotional aspect of it. My wife tells me all the time, like, hey, if you weren't in the car dealership world, she's like, I would still be driving my little beat up little truck that she has. She's like, because I just do not want to go to a car dealership. And she told me before, she's scared to do it. She said, there's no way I could do it. She said, there's just absolutely no way. And it's funny because I'm a very extroverted person, so I don't really think of it that way sometimes. And
Yeah.
yeah, I could see it being a headache.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's some great advice and some great knowledge that you shared with us today. If people want to go and learn more about you or find you on the internet or the TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
where should they go?
On the TikTok, I don't know if I want to go into my TikTok. What's funny about that though is everyone at this point kind of knows that I am on TikTok, and that I just do funny stuff. But my wife and I, we kind of do TikTok together now a little bit. I made it more of a joint account in that way. But you can go
Yeah,
to TikTok. We do some funny stuff. The Doms ATX, that's our TikTok account. Or
nice.
you can always just look at our website at work if you're looking for a car, or if you just want some advice about a car. Sterling Acura is where you want to be. Look up my name. I'll tell you and anyone who's going to listen to this the same thing that I tell everybody close to me, and that's, you don't have to buy a car from me, right? You can buy wherever you want, but if you have questions, or if you want to know, hey, am I getting a decent deal? Am I making a good decision? What do you think about this? I got all the time in the world. Sometimes feel free to reach out, and I'll try to answer whatever I can. I may try to sell you something, But if you don't buy it from me, there's never any hard feelings. I sell on average 2 people personally every single month that I know personally.
Yeah.
And that's just because I have people reaching out to me all the time. And on top of that, I probably talk to another 5 of people who just reach out about cars.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't feel pressured, but if you have questions and stuff, you can always look me up there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, y'all go find Ray and ask all your questions. Also, go follow the podcast at How to Adult TW on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we will continue to learn how to adult next week.